Hey everybody, thanks for watching. And just a quick reminder, I received you guys emails. Please do not send any more emails. I got you guys requests to extend the sale for another weekend. So the sale is up right now for Merkabah catalog. So this will be the weekend. It's like over 1,000 of you who sent emails. Please don't send any more. The sale is here. It's extended until Monday. So take advantage. So another thing, remember, that the links will expire. So if the link expires, make sure you just use that same link you got in your email to request more download time from the download site. So that's all you got to do. If you run out of space, it doesn't matter. If anything happens, it doesn't matter. You will always be able to go back and request more download time from the download site. If for some reason they won't let you get more time, send us an email, then we will manually send you a link, but just request more time for, more download time, and you'll get it. Just be patient. Even if you make a request, if it takes a second, you will get an email with the link, and appreciate your patience and support on that. But yes, it's extended for this weekend until Monday. So please take advantage. To everybody who sent emails, please don't send any more emails. Got you guys. So it's up. It's up right now. So let's get into this video. Told you guys I'm going to put out a lot more information. There is a lot of people, growing amount of people who are very interested in Bible information and understanding the hidden stuff in the Bible. This is something that I said would happen. I said eventually it will come a time where they start parlaying the facts, the real truth about the Bible into the Bible and saying, well, wait a minute. This is all esoteric stuff. Now, you're beginning to see preachers talk about the esoteric nature of the Bible and how this stuff is parables and how it's hidden. And they still dare not to say that Jesus is a parable, that he is not real and he means something different. But they're starting to recognize that these are allegories and these stories are things that can't be real. So this video is basically for a group of people, Christians, who I've been talking to, who can't understand the validity of the Bible, but they don't understand the role that the Greeks played. And this is one of those things to where if you're not looking, you will not find it. So big topic of discussion about the Greeks' role in this whole thing. And it's the same thing with the Black Hebrews. They don't want to see the Greeks' role in the Bible. And the whole thing it's not hard, because when you get real with yourself, you're going to come to a point where you start to try to find Bible history in real history. You won't find it. So the next thing you do is try to find what history is identical to what we're seeing in the Bible. Is there any people that did anything that the Hebrew Israelites did that maybe they could be, possibly confusing, or taking a story from something else and, putting it to the Hebrews. So this is like critical thinking. This is real research you have to do, because if you believe that this book is just like people really believing in it, and it's just, how could somebody make up something so long ago and it sticks so long? What is it about the book that people are holding on to? Like, what is going on? Because it's that keeps people stuck in the book. They just can't fathom how long this has been going on, that the powers that be and people in higher places and researchers could not have figured this out yet, as far as what we've figured out. So to them, it's like, you don't know what you're talking about. These people would have figured it out a long time ago. How come we haven't heard about this? When people look at Greek history, to think about Greek mythology, to think about the Greek gods, and of course, everything was about the Greek gods. And why would they even get into anything having to do with the Old Testament or Jesus or Moses and so on and so forth? Everything with the Greeks is about Greek mythology. But as I've shown you guys, and when you go and look, you will see it. You will see where the biblical parts of Greek mythology that they believe Greek mythology has taken from, the biblical text. You will see where you can compare it and how it's the same and where the stuff comes from. This is stuff we went into. but this is for these people. I know you guys watching, so check this out. And anybody who's into this information, we're going to get into a couple videos to really get a deeper understanding of this. And it's not hard to accept or see when you do the actual research. So again, you go back to the whole whoever smelt it dealt it thing. Like I said, when you go and trace back the Bible to its origin, you will find the Greeks. It's something I always talk about. And the Greeks is the one who gave us the Septuagint. But everybody says, well, no, they got it from the Hebrews. But we go back to LXX, the letters of Orestes, and we go back to these supposedly 72 Hebrew elders, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, who supposedly came to Alexandria, Egypt, to give us a translation of the Hebrew law from Hebrew to Greek. This is what LXX is talking about. This is how we supposedly get the Septuagint, which Septuagint means 70. Go through this a lot. So with that understanding, we don't have any proof that this happened. We don't have any proof that they found these, 72 elders. There's no proof. There's no proof. We have fragments of the Septuagint. We don't have the original. We never had it. So again, when you go back to the beginning of the Bible, it starts with the Greeks. So we know the Septuagint was written in Greek. We know that the New Testament is also written in Greek, and that most of the translations that we get, or basically all of the translations that we get, is coming from Greek manuscripts. So even people who want to go into the whole Ethiopian Bible, the whole Abba-Garima version. Remember, Abba-Garima was a Byzantine royal who gave the Ethiopians the Bible. He copied it from a Greek manuscript. So people say, well, we did have a Bible before slavery. It wasn't that the white man gave us the Bible. We had a Bible before slavery in Ethiopia, but you have to understand what they have at the Abba-Garima monastery. It's copied from a Greek text. Understand this. So you can't get the Masoretic text, which is, the first proven, book after, we can say after the Dead Sea Scrolls, supposedly. But you get the Masoretic text written in Hebrew. And again, there's no proof that we ever had any Hebrew manuscript that predates the Septuagint Greek. Let's get that out of the way. So now you got to get into how we can find things in the Bible that fits, real history. And again, this is where we come into the Greek. So to just, long story short, get to the point. So we have Hebrews going out, conquering, killing people, slaughtering all over. And the Bible was talking about God gave them the Ark of the Covenant and all its power, so on and so forth. And they're going out and they're conquering. Now, you can't find this in real history. If they're doing all this conquering, Moses part the sea, and they're going out and they slaughtering the Amorites and the Girgashites and the Perishites and the Hivites and all that. Where's the proof? There should be some type of documentation or some type of, written historical record of these battles. Something. There's nothing. So the only people who we find who was going out and doing, conquering on this level is the Greeks. So again, you go back to when the Greeks take over Egypt from the Persians, and then Alexander dies. Then you have the wars of the Diadochi, and then you have this long war where they basically spreading Hellenization and they're going throughout Europe and Northern Africa and basically taking the indigenous lands from those indigenous people. So in the Bible, when it's talking about the Hebrews going out and killing all these tribes, those tribes were African tribes that was already settled in Europe and Northern Africa. And these are the only people in actual history that we can find anything that resembles what we read in the Bible as far as conquest at that time. So when you look at real actual history, it's the Greeks who you'll find, nobody else. But the Bible also gives you clues, and they're telling you about, this power and these people who's basically going to be going out and conquering. So we got into this, and this is Ancient History Volume 1. Take a look. But in this case, the key here is Tyrus or Tyre. So you have to understand it's the same place talking about the same thing. As you can see here, this is what it basically looked like on the map. We're going to deal a lot with this place. There's a lot of history wrapped up in here. It's unbelievable. And we're going to get into it. Let's read. The Phoenicians, city of Tyre, a rich history of industry, mythology, and conflict. According to tradition, the city of Tyre was founded in 2750 BC and is considered one of the world's oldest metropolises. Think about that. For much of its history, Tyre has played an important role in the region. The Tyrians were master seafarers and explorers. By sailing around the Mediterranean, the Tyrians made contact with other civilizations and founded colonies. As a result, Tyre had a special place in a number of ancient Mediterranean communities. Greek mythology states Europa, for whom the continent of Europe was named, you see where we're going, was a Phoenician princess of Tyre who was abducted by Zeus in the form of a bull and brought to the island of Crete. On the island, Zeus revealed his identity, and Europa became the first queen of Crete. One of Europa's brothers was Cadmus, who, according to legend, brought the alphabet to mainland Greece. In addition, the Tyrians also founded colonies, the most famous of which is Rome's greatest rival, Carthage. It is believed that this city was founded by another Tyrian princess, Dido, who left Tyre to escape her evil husband. It is said that when she arrived in North Africa, she requested a small piece of land from the Berber king, Larbus, and subsequently founded Carthage. The story of Dido is most vividly portrayed in Virgil's Aeneid. So we're talking about Tyre or Tyrus, and you see how they do it. In the Bible, you got Tyrus, but it's really Tyre, Tyrus, Tyre. You know, when you see one of the names, it's talking about the same place, a city in Phoenicia. Now, understand one, of course, Phoenicia is basically, modern day, today is Lebanon. But we understand this is where Europa comes from, which Europa gives us Europe. So again, you see where we are headed. We're talking about Europe. We're talking about the Europeans. Huge history going on here that we're going to get into. So understand one, of course, this land, didn't belong to the Phoenicians. You got to understand what the Phoenicians is. This was clearly part of Egyptian territory when you understand the Egyptian kingdom. It was part of the Egyptian empire, that land for a long time. Don't let history fool you. We're going to get into this. But it was a part of Egyptian territory. Now, the name Phoenician was given to it, by the Greeks. The Greeks is the one who named it Phoenician, or, the Phoenicians. And it comes from the Greek word phonikos. So Phoenician comes from the Greek word phonikos, which means purple people. Phonikos, purple people. So this is where we get Phoenician. What are the purple people? They call them purple people. One, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, we get so black, we can look purple. That's not it. But Phonikos or Phoenician, that purple people thing comes from the morax. The morax is basically a shellfish or like a sea slug kind of sort of. Basically, it emits this purple dye that is very strong. It doesn't just wash off or come off. So a lot of people, wanted to use it because it actually got stronger in the sun, So if you use that purple dye, it actually got stronger. So this is why they call them purple people, because the people who worked in there, getting these shells out in the water, of course, the dye would cover them up and it would be like purple, when it came out. So Phoenician comes from Phonikos, and the Greeks are the one who came up with that name. So now most people, when they think about the Phoenicians, when they think about that land, some people think about the Persians, think about Arabs, some people think about Europeans being there. A lot of people, when they think about the Phoenicians, don't take it back to black people. And this is one of the problems. There's a lot of debates when people start getting into ancient Phoenician. Who was the Phoenicians? Who was the Phoenicians? Was they black? Was they white? What have you? And you can understand why when you start going into that history, especially when you see the Greeks talk about in their mythology getting a language, which we'll get into that. But a lot of people don't, associate it with African people or black people. But the land was clearly Egyptian territory, plain and simple. You go there and you have the Temple of Obelisk and Byblos. Now, you go to Byblos, you have the Temple of Obelisk, still stand to this day. We're talking dating over, 1000 BCE. And the temple's still there. You can see it's all these obelisks, all these little, statues or what have you there, as well as other Egyptian artifacts and Egyptian sites there. It's one of the tourist attractions when you go there. Now, you start going back over, you can see, not too far away is Tyre, the city of Tyre. Not that far. You keep going over more, and guess what else you run into? You run into Israel. You keep going over, of course, more, and of course, Egypt. All of this was Egyptian territory. Of course, they had all this land, all this space. There's going to be a lot of, things that you research and see that's going to try to fit biblical history within there. Whenever you see that, keep reading because you need to know the bullshit, but it's bullshit, plain and simple. But this was Egyptian territory, the stuff that's there, which they won't dare get rid of because they make money off it, as a tourist attraction, is still there to prove who the area belonged to. Now you have to think about something, because you have the Phoenician alphabet, you have Egyptian, and of course they're different. We're going to get into that as well. But you have to realize what the Phoenician territory was, what Tyre was, what that area was. Since it's on that coast and you have the only other way that you can get in there, if you're Greece or what have you and you're trying to come there, this is the place where you would have to land, as far as a ship. So if you're going to be doing trade or anything with people in that area, like Syria, what have you, Lebanon, Israel, you need a closer port, which that port would be the closest port. So what the Egyptians did was they basically left that port open. They left Tyre basically open, that city, and that whole area up to Byblos. All that area was basically like an open seaport where you had so many different countries coming in there trading. They was trading, they had a lot of merchants there. There was a lot of marketplaces. They had goods that was bringing into other countries. This is what everybody talks about. It's well known. Tyre is well known. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of historians talk about it. But everybody know it as the people who was living there was like, fishermen and real seafaring people who traveled out, who knew everybody. So it's even in the Bible. So when you read in Acts 21:3, it says, now when we had discovered Cyprus, which we know Cyprus is right there, we left it on the left hand and sailed into Syria. Now, I don't know how the map was back then, but you can't sail into Syria, easily today, and landed in Tyre, for there the ship was to unload her burden. In other verses, it says unload her cargo. So they just, King James Version, kept it old school. But it says to unload her cargo, of course. Now, as I said, you're going to read a lot of stuff. You're going to start reading stuff about the Philistines and the Hebrew Israelites, some kind of war and all this kind of drama going on. It's bullshit. All of this is there to give validity to the Bible, plain and simple. We understand what happened in history. This was Egyptian land. What happened? We know who conquered that area was the Persians. So when you look at this little relief here, what it say down here, it says 500 BCE or the 5th century BCE, excuse me. Of course, we know in the 5th century, this is around the time when, the Persians took that land. So you see clearly, one, when you just look at recorded history, it all matches up. That's just one of the things we're going to go through in this video. And you're going to see recorded history matching up with the Bible, debunking the Bible. As I said, there's no way you can read the book. And if you read the book and you know history, game. Plain and simple. This is why they have to hide history, why they have to distort it. But that area clearly, belonged to the Egyptians. And of course, because, Phoenicia was the actual place, you find a lot of artifacts around that area from the Phoenicians. You go into Spain, you find from the Phoenician period in Spain, artifacts in Spain. But of course, the Phoenician period was the Egyptian period because they were Egyptians. But you find artifacts pertaining to the Phoenicians throughout the area, the so-called Middle East. And we can find this stuff. This is how we know these people were real. They actually existed because this was a trading port and so many people was coming in and out and buying goods, Egyptian stuff as well. And we can find this stuff. This stuff exists. This is how we know. This is how when you do research in history, if we ain't finding it pertaining to the Hebrews, it's not, they didn't exist. It's not real. So when we look, we know the history. We know that, again, the Persians came in, conquered that Egyptian land, which Tyre was a part of the Egyptian territory. They came and they took it. Then we know that the Greeks came and took it from the Persians. So now what I talked about in the video on YouTube about the Hebrew Israelites, what I talked about, the Bible, as far as the Bible using its stories, the Bible they're trying to basically justify the genocide and slavery of African people. This is what the Bible was talking about. We talked about that in those videos because the Bible was giving you all these stories about the conquest of these lands. And a lot of people don't realize, even though they hide them, with names, with different names, that these lands are pertaining to African people, the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites and all that stuff like that. It's talking about African land that they took and said that God, allowed them to take it. This is what it's pertaining to. So you got to understand the story. We know, again, Greeks came in there, took it from the Persians. So you got to understand Tyre was a huge city. You had Tyre and you had Tyre, the mainland. And you had Tyre, you see that part that sticks out in the water. It was an island, unto itself for a while, for a long time. But you had, when the Greeks came in there, Alexander and his troops basically slaughtered everybody on the mainland, and they basically killed a bunch of people, and they enslaved whoever they could enslave. A lot of people bought their way out of the whole situation. Some people couldn't, but they basically, was recorded as them slaughtering so many people and completely destroying the city. I mean, decimating it. They came in with all kinds of, battering rams and stuff and just basically laid the city to rubble. Then the people who, fled to the island. So you had the Phoenician people and the people who was there basically jump in their ships and go out to the island. A lot of people kept going. But the people who couldn't go anywhere else went to their home on the island. As you can see, it was, as I said, it was an island. So, for the next 7 months, Alexander and his troops went on killing and destroying, killing people, enslaving people, and destroying the city. But what they did was they used the rubble from the city to basically build a causeway from the mainland of Tyre to the island of Tyre. And in 7 months, they had that causeway built. And in 7 months, they went to that island and completely massacred about 30,000 people there. And the same situation occurred where some people bought their way out, some people couldn't, the rest got enslaved or got killed. So he finally did end up taking that island and killing a bunch of people. So you can see it now how it looks. The causeway is there, but it wasn't there before. And it is attributed to Alexander. This is something that everybody knows. The Romans have a monument there to this day, pertaining to Alexander. This is history, people. This is recorded history. And it doesn't fit with the Bible. So it's funny how, when we look at their book, this is how they try to hide, away from it and say that, of course they're not going to say they wrote the book. But this is how we can look at actual recorded history and see it doesn't fit with what the Bible's saying. But we can read the Bible and get the clues and see that this is where they stole their stories from and put them in the Bible. But real history says something different. So again, when we go to Ezekiel, and understand, take note that this stuff is all in Ezekiel. When we talked about before, about Satan and all that stuff in Ezekiel as well. So we read in Ezekiel 26, 3 through 6, it says, "Therefore thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Tyrus," which Tyrus is Tyre, "and will cause many nations to come up against thee, as the sea causeth his waves to come up. And they shall destroy the walls of Tyrus and break down her towers. I will also scrape her dust from her and make her like the top of a rock. It should be a place for the spreading of nets in the midst of the sea, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. And it shall become a spoil of the nations, and her daughters which are in the field shall be slain by the sword, and they shall know that I am the Lord." So we know it's all bullshit. But this is how you prove that the Greeks are the ones who created the Bible. This is how you prove it. One, who else would know about this history? Now, I just told you about the story about how Tyre was laid siege by Alexander. But then you read in the Bible, in Ezekiel, them talking about, God, the Lord, basically sending nations against Tyre. Now, we know there was nations that basically came up against Tyre. I won't say many nations, it was basically two, the Persians and the Greeks. So on the one hand, you have the Bible giving us the story of Tyre, but then you have actual recorded history talk about something completely different. So it's going to get even more deeper. We're going to decipher this thing real quick using the Bible and actual history. And it's easy because the thing is, one, a lot of people read this stuff and get confused. But as I said, when you know the Bible and you know real recorded history, it's easy to break down as I'm doing right here. But again, let's go to Ezekiel again. Ezekiel 26:7 says, "For thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will bring upon Tyrus Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, a king of kings from the north, with horses and with chariots and with horsemen and companies and much people." There is no proof of a Nebuchadnezzar coming into Tyre and basically laying siege to the place. There's no proof. We're going to bust it up in a second to prove the point. So understand, one, when I talked about before, when you hear about the Philistines and Hebrew Israelites, what have you, in Tyre, it's all bullshit. They're trying to create this faulty timeline again to try to make it an inconsistency in the rulership of Kemet. Because if they can do that in the rulership of Kemet and the Egyptian territory, then they can interject, they people in history. Because remember, they got to fit themselves in history somehow, some way. They got to try to fit themselves in there. By them saying, well, the Egyptians didn't always rule this land, but they did. Because we know we can prove it. But they'll admit that the Egyptians did rule Phoenicia. But they say, well, it was off and on, off and on. But the Egyptians, being the cool people that they is, basically said, all right, we own this territory. We basically teaching y'all anyway. Let's just use this land, because the Egyptians was basically neutral because they work with everybody. Let's use this land so nobody won't feel cheated, and let these people come in and use this land as a port. Again, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark and them talked about how much good the Egyptians did for everybody. Even when people go and look at the artifacts and the history of that land, they see it pertain to many people, but everybody it goes back to the Egyptians. So when they find a lot of the artifacts from, the Phoenician times, it goes back to many different countries, different people, because the Egyptians let so many people in there. So, all the Greeks had to do was take real history and distort it. Stuff that you can go back and kind of say, maybe it's possible, cast out, conceal it, distort it, so they can kind of interject, history in there. And this is exactly what they did. So it's saying that Nebuchadnezzar, God sent Nebuchadnezzar there to basically destroy the city. Now, bullshit. Prove it. Prove that Nebuchadnezzar came there and destroyed it. Can't prove that, especially when we have already recorded history, proven history of Alexander destroying the place. So again, Bible says one thing, proven history says something else. Nobody can prove that he came in there. It's not possible. So the thing is this, and again, this is how you bust open history bust open the Bible by understanding history. Again, one, the only Nebuchadnezzar, because there's a bunch of them, the only Nebuchadnezzar that could have been close to the time that this happened with the destruction of Tyrus, either one, the only Nebuchadnezzar that could have been there during that time was Nebuchadnezzar II. But he died in the 6th century BCE, which is long before the destruction of Tyre. So that's the only Nebuchadnezzar that can be even close to that time in actual history. So we know, no, it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar. So again, this is how you catch the Bible. Now, this is important. And the way that we prove this is, one, you go back to the Bible, to Ezekiel. Ezekiel 26:14. Remember, it says, "And I will make thee like the top of a rock. Thou shalt be a place to spread nets upon. Thou shalt be built no more." This is the so-called prophecy of Ezekiel. "Thou shalt be built no more. For I, the Lord, have spoken it, saith the Lord God." Now, the only time that Tyre was destroyed to where it was built no more began with Alexander. And we're talking about the 4th century BCE. Long after that Nebuchadnezzar, that's close to this time frame, had died already. So we're talking the 4th century BCE. So that's important because ever since Alexander destroyed the place, you had the Romans coming later and basically take it from the Greeks, and they built on it, and then that got torn down by the Arabs. So this ruin that I showed you with the basically the temple of the obelisk or what have you is ruins. That whole area is a tourist attraction to this day. It's still in ruins. It's nothing built on there. You can see the remnants of Rome there, the remnants of Greece there, the remnants of the ancient Egyptians, but it has never been rebuilt. the city that was destroyed. So this is the so-called prophecy, which again, it's one of those prophecies where it's bullshit. What's to stop anybody from going there, the government from going there right now and rebuilding the place? Now, one is a landmark, so they can't do it. So this is how you fulfill the prophecy. Oh, we're making a landmark, nobody can build there. But nothing ain't really stopping people from building except for humans, men. This ain't God or no angels stopping people from building. It's permits, laws, legal shit that can be fixed by humans. So it's not a real prophecy. So understand, again, this is how you fix that whole thing. This is how you figure that whole thing out. We know one, it's not Nebuchadnezzar because he wasn't alive during that time. Two, the prophecy, its own prophecy in the Bible only fits around the time when Alexander in real history actually destroyed the place. So again, all the Greeks had to do, because remember, the King James Version was written between 1604 and 1611. So all they had to do was basically, they know the history, they know what happened, was put this in the book. They understand recorded history is already documented by many people. All they had to do was put it in the book, distort it, and make it as if, it fits with biblical history. Because when you go back during that time, you can say, well, such a thing happened. I guess it's talking about them. No, this is actual history. So we know it's bullshit when it's talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Now, another one of the daggers that basically gives it away we can find in the Bible. Again, talking about Alexander. The only person this fits is Alexander. So when you read again in Ezekiel 26:12 says, and they shall make a spoil of thy riches, and make a prey of thy merchandise, and they shall break down thy walls and destroy thy pleasant houses. As I said, Alexander destroyed the houses. And they shall lay thy stones and thy timber and thy dust in the midst of the water. Okay, so who did that? We know it's talking clearly about Alexander and about how he tore down the cities. He took the rubble, he took the trees, took everything and built that causeway to get to the island. It's right there in the Bible. But does it talk about Alexander? No. It's trying to divert you away from actual history, because if you follow actual history, it'll lead you to the truth, of course. But we can see what it's pertaining to. So again, you have them taking real history, distorting it, changing it, but leaving enough in there for you to figure out exactly who it's talking to. And that's for the Masons. That's for the Masons. The Masons understand. They can go in the book and understand, what it's talking to, who it's pertaining to. That's for the historian as well. Because if you're a historian, well, wait a minute, damn. This can't be. This is Alexander's story. It's clear as day. But you heard people before say, Alexander is in, the Bible, what have you. Yeah, he's in there. But it's not talking about him in name specifically. But we can understand it's alluding to him to get people to break it down and understand what it's really talking about. So now, remember in the Saturn and Satan series, we talked about Alexander. We talked about their whole story. And, we're going to get into that in a second. But remember, Tyre was basically being destroyed because the man proclaimed to be a god. So when you go to Ezekiel 28, as we talked about before, it is talking about the story of Satan. Remember, it's basically trying to couple Satan with this man. It's trying to give you this comparison. So he's addressing the king of Tyre, but he's talking about Satan. It's giving you this comparison in Ezekiel as well as in Isaiah. Remember, it said a man specifically. So remember, go back to the story of Alexander. We talked about how, he is the only person, who fits this story. He's the only person you can look to that actually proclaimed to be a god, who was a man that we know existed. So remember in the story with Alexander, you had his mom. Alexander proclaiming to be a god because his mom was basically seduced by Jupiter, which Jupiter would be the Roman equivalent of the Greek Zeus. So remember the depiction when you had Olympias in the bed and Zeus on top of her with like the serpent lower half. And this is basically where, he basically seduced Olympias and Alexander was born. And remember, Olympias tells Alexander on his way out to battle that, he basically is the son of a god. And he was walking around proclaiming to be the son of a god. So it's giving you that story so we can match that, with a man proclaiming to be the son of a god, with the story of Tyre, and understand all of this is talking about the same thing in this passage. It's It's talking about Alexander. It's trying to give you the coupling. Not just that, you have the serpent aspect. You have the reptilian aspect of it. You have Zeus being coupled with the serpent, the reptilian, and this whole union going on. It's trying to tell you something. So when you put the story together, when you look at the entire story, one, it's not only giving you Alexander, it's trying to tell you who is responsible for basically beginning the rise of the European powers. It's pointing you straight to Alexander. So when you go back and look at the story, it's telling you, one, who Satan is, because this is when people tell you, hey, these Europeans proclaim are described as Satan in the Bible. This is what it's talking about. You have Tyre giving us Europa, giving us Europe, giving us the Europeans, giving us all of these things right here in this area, which this area just so happens to be where, they basically laid claim, started the rise of the power, of the European powers right here. This is where Europe derives from. This is where the people begin, or they attest to the rise of their power right here. So at the same time, one, as again I said, Satan has many aspects. This is one of his aspects. One of his aspects is black, is white as well. It all goes into the whole duality thing. It don't just go to white people, but to black people as well. But these people represent the negative part of Satan. So they put in all this stuff here to make you note something. So again, Dr. Ben, John Henry Clark, they talked about Alexander the Greek all the time. Alexander the Greek. And that's something that always stuck with me. Remember, I said before, when I first went to Canada, when I was in the military, when I came back, I was lost. Now, the woman did tell me in the Cairo Museum, first time I went there, that I should know about Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben, he get his books, whatever, And luckily, I was able to get his books, and I started reading about Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben always talked about the Greeks, and he didn't really get into it, this way, as deep as this. But it was so much history that he gave about the Greeks. That's true history. Now, Dr. Ben will tell you, you're supposed to be reading your Bible. So I guess he figured, one, if you're reading your book, it's no way you're going to miss this. A lot of times we just expect people to know the Bible when people don't know it. I'll be seriously, the way these Christians be coming at me, I'll be seriously expecting them to be experts. So when I'm saying stuff and pertaining to book, chapter, and verses, they be clueless, huh? And then I just get out the conversation. I'm like, no, you just emotional. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. But Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark stayed on Alexander the Greek for a long time to try to get people to trace him, because there's so much history that pursues this man. When you start following him, you get the whole breakdown, as I just pointed out, and it gets a lot more deeper. You start to, peel away a lot of the layers, and we can see the rise of this European power and see that proceeding all of this, we get Judaism, we get the Torah or the Septuagint, what have you, and we get the beginning of the religion being established. And as I talked about before, these people who they basically forced Judaism on was the slaves, was the leftover black people in those lands. So you got to ask yourself, one, how did Judaism start? Remember, I just talked about how Alexander and them basically enslaved all these people while they was there. They killed a lot of them, but enslaved a lot of the Africans, the Egyptians that was there. Again, the Egyptians was the first Jews. It's just that simple. These are the people they indoctrinated into the whole ideology, because they tried to force Hellenization and the Greek customs on them. But you can't do that to no damn Egyptians, because they know. Remember, it was the double cross. So when the Bible's talking about sending Nebuchadnezzar in there to basically, kill off Tyre, it's kind of the same thing that happened. Remember I said before that Alexander and them, I believe, sent the Persians in there, because they couldn't just go in there themselves. There was a double cross on the Persians as well. Remember, the Egyptians and the Greeks was living hand in hand. Romans as well, for a time. They was living together. Peace, harmony. The Egyptians helped them build so many of the things that's in Greece. The Egyptians didn't deal with other people, gods, and what have you, and stuff like that, but they was respectful of other people's things and understood that, Greek mythology is basically Egyptian mythology, and they had their own little spin on it. They understood because they taught them how to do the shit. So they lived together. peacefully. Everything was cool. So you can't have the Greek government basically say we're going to turn on these people, because the people wouldn't be for it. The people was cool with the Egyptians, probably likely intermarried in some cases with some of the people. Everything was fine. So what do? You give the Persians the key to the back door and say, go in there and take that shit, knowing that you can beat the Persians later on, knowing the weakness, knowing if they get into certain points, you know how to get in there. But if the Persians take over, then you can say, oh, well, we're going in there and basically helping out our brothers, the Egyptians. Remember, they only came to help the Egyptians one time. And I forget that story on one part of the land, but they was defeated. Some of the Greeks came to help the Egyptians out in some part of, I believe it was near Ionia somewhere, but they was defeated and they fled. But the Greeks didn't come in full force to the aid of the Egyptians. Nobody did, because people wanted to see them fail. You know, it's like being cool with somebody with somebody who owned a mansion on the block, the biggest, best house on the block. They're still looking out for y'all, but it's so much more in their house. And eventually people get together and say, you know, I can't wait till their house falls, because as soon as it falls, I'm going to run in there and get what I can get. People not being grateful, people who have a material mindset, not thinking about, you know, the spiritual aspect of what the Egyptians was trying to do for them. But you had the Greeks basically fall to the Romans eventually. But before all that, you had the Greeks basically, you know, enslaved these black people. They created Judaism and they pushed it on the people and got them to basically indoctrinate their own people with Judaism. And they eventually spread it over. After time, you know, went by and they got people on board, they spread the religion. Because again, you know, the whole thing with LXX, the letters of Orestes, goes against the actual history of the Greeks. There's no way that Ptolemy II Philadelphus actually, you know, paid the Jews all this money to come and do this translation and freed a bunch of the Jewish slaves. It don't fit. It don't make sense. Why? Because of Hellenization. We understand that Hellenization was going on for a long time. That Hellenization was them afflicting the Serapis, which I showed you in the video when I went to the Cairo Museum. Serapis, the actual statue. Them, you know, forcing Serapis and forcing these Greek gods on the people. This is what it was. They was forcing the Greek ideology or what have you, trying to force it on the people. So one of the things we have to understand, one, is if the Jews was just this separate people, separate, you know, away from the Greeks, why would the Greeks be trying to push Hellenization on them, knowing that once you set these people free, they got their own religion or what have you, and you trying to push Hellenization? Because they did push it in Israel, but again, the people weren't going for that shit. They wasn't going for no Hellenization. They knew what it was. So they came up with Judaism. They came up with it. They trying to make it like, oh, well, this happened between us and the Jews, so they can establish a faulty timeline by saying that Judaism was already established before this. Bullshit. It didn't happen until after that. So when y'all was trying to push, which is recorded, when y'all was trying to push Hellenization in that area, there was no Judaism yet. Y'all was still developing it, working on it. And then since the people didn't fall for the shit and fall for Serapis and fall for all their bullshit, they came out with Judaism, pushed it. You know, you have generational knowledge is what happened. So that generation passed. And remember, these people don't care about time. So they can be working towards one agenda and die trying to fulfill that agenda. But once the time passed and the kids now got indoctrinated into it, and they just grew up with Judaism and grew up with it, and it stuck. Because all the people who knew the truth was dead and gone. And then you had people with no knowledge, wasn't passed down, and they got born into this whole Judaism, and it just spread. And this is how they basically spread Judaism. So you have Ezekiel giving us this story, coupling, you know, Satan with this man, with the so-called king of Tyre or what have you. So again, you look at this story again, and as I started out with, and you would ask yourself, well, why isn't the story about Satan in the beginning of the book? Why is it not in Genesis? That gets you thinking about Genesis. So you go to Genesis and you think about, one, the story is talking about a person pretending to be a god or acting like a god. Remember, it's not 100% definitively clear on what's going on here. Is the dude possessed by Satan? It's one of the most debated books in the Bible. Again, we're going to get into that, all this stuff and more when we get into the whole series on the Bible, which is going to be coming up soon. But it's debated because you got to really think about it. One, okay, well, give me the story. Give me the story. What's going on? What happened? Because if this was actual history and stuff that happened, you can give us a biblical account of what really happened up in heaven. Why did Satan rebel? What was going on? We know it talks about what it talks about, but go into detail the way you do with the building of Noah's Ark, as far as what the hell happened up there. What happened? But it doesn't really give us that. Instead, we get this. We get what's in Ezekiel. We get what's in Isaiah. We get distorted stuff in Revelations. It's not definitively clear, and they coupling Satan with a man and kind of confusing you as to what's going on here. So when you go back to Genesis, and it's talking about, Adam and Eve and the serpent story, what have you, and you have to look at it and say, well, damn, it's almost the same as in Ezekiel. Because understand, whatever created us, whatever it was, it's not God. That's what we think of God. Whatever created us is not the same being that created the universe, all the other planets, the stars, or what have you. Plain and simple, it is not. So when you read in Genesis 1:26, when it says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, what is it talking about? Again, this goes back to consciousness. It goes back to consciousness. It goes back to consciousness and existence itself. So making man in our likeness, there is no visible image of consciousness. There is no visible image of existence except for existence, something that exists. So the fact that we exist and have a consciousness, we would be in the likeness of the Creator, which would be consciousness, existence. So basically, as I said before, you had consciousness and existence create a physical form, which would be not just us, everything that we see out in the universe. So let us make man in our image, after our likeness. The image and likeness of the Creator would be what? What we are. We are that. We are the result of consciousness creating energy, creating the elements, creating matter. That's what we are. So when you go to the creation of Adam, talking about the atoms, those are the elements. Creating man from the dust of the ground. The earth, stardust. That's all it is. That's what we are. We are stardust. We are made up of stardust. It's just that simple. Everything started with stardust. Big chunks, from dust to clumps to big boulders to what have you. You go from planets, you go from grass and everything and what have you to us. These are all elements and energy and all this stuff coming from one conscious source. It's not no being that created this body. Again, this body was created. And then when you go back to the story in Genesis, it's telling you that. Remember, let us form man. Make man. I'm going to mold this man. Like Canaan, molding man on a potter's wheel. God didn't create this spirit, this energy, this soul. They didn't create that. So when Satan goes to the garden and he says to Eve, hey, bullshit, you ain't going to die if you eat off this tree. He know you ain't going to die. Because he understood that they were gods lacking knowledge. You a God. You just like this dude. You just don't have the knowledge. You don't have the understanding of knowing what you are. Know thyself. Going back to the Egyptian parable. You just don't know who you is. Why does Satan know? Because he went through the same shit. When you get into the whole parable of the story, God created him. Why don't you just kill Satan off him? Get rid of him. You can't, because he's just like you. He is you. So understand what it's trying to say here is the Creator, whoever it is just like us. Made from what? Stardust. It's not the real supreme consciousness of the universe. It's just whatever these beings are that created us. They are made from the same thing as we are. They have more knowledge than we do. They have a different composition than we do. They have more knowledge. They can do more things. They are, well more experienced in this universe than us. But they are not the creator of the entire universe. So when you're tracing all this back to the powers that be, when you're tracing all this back to Ezekiel, when you're tracing this back to, what we talked about as far as these people proclaiming themselves to be God, it's basically telling you exactly the same thing. That these people are proclaiming to be God, claiming to have all this power. They may know more than you do, but in essence, for real, they just like you. They are not all powerful beings. They are not the gods, the creators. It may seem that way because they trick you to believe they are. So now remember, we talked about the purple dye. We talked about the purple dye of the Morax, and the purple dye that basically gives Phoenician its names. It's named from the Greeks, who called it Phoenician, from the Greek word phonicus, and that purple dye. Now, purple dye, again, everything that we've been seeing so far, you can go in the Bible and you can find purple dye as well. So when you look in Ezekiel 27:7 says, "Fine linen with broidered work from Egypt was that which thou spreadest forth to be thy sail. Blue and purple from the isles of Elisha was that which covered thee." So this is Elisha. Elisha is basically in ancient Ionia. Now, Elisha is a man. Elisha is the son of Jovan. Jovan goes back to Japheth. Japheth, remember, goes back to Greek mythology, to Iapetus, who was a titan. Remember, Iapetus is one of the moons of Saturn. It's the moon that looks like the Death Star. So you have all of this Greek mythology, everything pointing you into the direction of the Greeks, one, but also in the direction of Satan. Saturn, Satan. They're giving you everything right here, all in Ezekiel. Ezekiel is really important to understand when you start going through the verses and seeing what all this stuff pertains to. We only scrape the surface. We only going to be able to scrape the surface in this video. It's so much more, but we will eventually get into all of it as we go along. But it's giving you so much, so we understand, one, what is the purple dye about? We understand this goes back to the colors of royalty, the purple and scarlet. We know about that. So the purple goes back to royalty. There was never a king of Tyre. The Egyptians didn't do that whole king thing. The only person who would even be crowned king in Tyre would be Alexander. He's the only one that will be crowned king. So they're giving you the clues here. What did they do? We're talking about, one, this is the birthplace of Europe. The Europeans are the one who started this whole king shit. Kings. They talk about kings, one, everybody was kings, this and that. And the thing is, the timeline is out of whack. Because you would think all these territories that existed during the time of Kemet, around the time a lot of these people was king, they had no concept of it. It was just about conquest. The whole king things was them understanding how a governmental structure was set up. We had that in Africa, not just in Kemet. So they got it from us. But this is how they began their kingship, the European powers. Purple was their color. We understand about purple and scarlet. In the Bible, we know the Vatican. That's their colors. They wear purple and scarlet. So they're trying to basically mark, as I said before, the beginning of their reign. So you had the siege of Tyre and the siege of Israel, which is one of the reasons why Israel is the Holy Land, because you have the religions come together there, which are the religions that's leading everything right now. But you got to understand, look it up. 332 BC, they actually conquered Israel and Tyre at the same time. These are the holy lands to them. This is the places they still rule to this day, that they cloak. It's all still ruled by Rome. Rome never lost power. Whatever they tell you is bullshit. They are still in power and have been still in power. Again, the papacy. They pointing you right into their direction. Again, we know purple and scarlet. We know Revelation is talking about the woman dressed in purple and scarlet. When she had jewels and everything on her body, just comparing her to the same thing they said to Satan. This is why the Geneva Bible called the Pope the Antichrist. Adorned in jewels and, pearls and everything, just like they describe Satan. They describe the whore of Babylon, or the so-called, scarlet witch and everything you want to call her. Same shit. Pointing you right in that direction, giving you everything right in Ezekiel. You just got to look. When you start reading, there's no way you can get around it. Everything we've been talking about is going back to Europe. It's pertaining to the powers that be, pertaining to the European powers, and they rise. They laid siege to Israel. They laid siege to Tyre. They had to get into these lands first in order to, really begin their conquest. And this was what really started it for them. And it's pointing you right in this direction and giving you everything. So now remember, Nebuchadnezzar, in the book of Daniel chapter 2, remember, it's giving you his dream. Remember, Daniel was supposed to interpret his dream. He had these dreams and he tried to get the magicians and everybody to come and interpret it. They couldn't do it, so he was like killing them off or what have you. And then, he was like, Daniel, you're supposed to have favor with God or what have you. You come in and interpret these dreams for me. And he came and he basically, told him about the dreams. Remember the dreams. Think about it. Somebody's head just exploded right now. What were the dreams about? The 4 nations. The 4 nations. Remember, gold, and iron, the brass and iron or what have you, dirt. What were those 4 nations? Here they go. Here they go. Now, Babylon, we can skip Babylon. Babylon, what should be there, should be Egypt. But this is how they try to hide and distort it, putting Babylon there. But you have Babylon, which should be Egypt. You have Persia. You have the Greeks. You have the Romans. You have the Romans again. What is we talking about here? Remember, we go back to Ezekiel 26:7, I believe it was, when he basically said, I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar to lay siege to where? Tyre. Didn't he send Nebuchadnezzar? Look at what Nebuchadnezzar is. You understand what I'm saying? You get it now. So when you look at the bust, notice how it's in the shape of a man, but that man is supposed to be Nebuchadnezzar. And you have the colors, the stones, whatever, the gold or what have you. But you have this man representing the nations that actually went in there and basically laid siege to Tyre. So when he said in Ezekiel that I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar, he really did send Nebuchadnezzar. This is the hint it's giving. Again, it's one of those daggers, to the Bible. When not only do they hide, see how they hit it really well? They hit it really good. Not only do they give you the story, but you have to look deeper. And this is what we're going to go through as we go, into the Bible more and more so. When you look deeper, the answer is right there. They give it to you. This is why I say to people, it's in codes. It's hidden. It's in riddles. You got to know where to look. If you read the book and you know history, you're going to be able to figure the stuff out. So again, we start to look. There's absolutely no proof of Israelites. There's no proof of Hebrews existing before the 3rd century BCE, the 4th century BCE. They don't exist. There are people who are hearing these stories. When you go do the research, it's all of a sudden out of nowhere, you start hearing about these Hebrews. And then you find the people calling themselves Hebrews. This is why the black Hebrews are saying, well, wait a minute, we were black first. And that's true, but it's not true in the sense that these people really existed. They were made this way. So when you had the Greeks conquer the land we know as Israel, it was already Africans there. Egyptians was there. Black people was there. So they were forced upon. This teaching was forced upon them. And this whole understanding of them being these people was forced upon them. And there were people who were going out to try to ascertain the validity of the claims of these people, and they couldn't do it. So as I talk about this, you have Hecataeus. Now, Hecataeus was one of those people who was a Greek historian who was going out and supposedly trying to figure out the validity of the Jews. And he's a historian. So he supposedly mapped the world and went and did all this. So they're going to Hecataeus to find out, hey, did these people exist? And Hecataeus tells us straight up, he heard that they existed from the Egyptians, but he's never met a Jew. So you have to think about that. These people are who the Bible claims they are. Somebody would have heard. A historian that's going out and basically supposedly traveling the world and doing, research will have heard of Jews if they did everything that the Bible claims that they did. But Hecataeus, who was basically, he lived during the time the Egyptians were in power. He lived through that. He's seen what was going on. And you have a drop off, him, Herodotus, and then there's a drop off because of war. And then you have Diodorus Siculus, who basically picks up later on. And he has one of the largest libraries. Everybody knows he has like the largest library of old books, manuscripts. And he is the one who is quoting Hecataeus. And one of the things I'm going to show you in a video coming up, that everything that we know about Hebrews, everything we know about the Israelites, is coming from Diodorus Siculus, basically via his notes that he has from Hecataeus, who is basically considered the number one authority on the Jews back then and their validity. Nobody else. So everybody talking about Josephus, Josephus and everybody else, every other historian is referring to the writings of Diodorus Siculus and what he got from Hecataeus. That's it. It's the end of it. End of story. Nobody else has anything. Nobody else has any more information than this. Anybody who does real research understands this, that everybody is copying from this information. So now, if you do real research, everybody who has went on to study this whole thing and getting into the whole thing with the creation of the Bible. Now, if you're arguing biblical doctrine or biblical religion, especially with Hebrew Israelites, this is what you're getting into when you get into the scholarship of it. So for those of you who have looked, what did you find? You find, because you're trying to prove the authenticity of the Bible, which we cannot, because we're never going to have the originals or be able to prove that they even existed. So what we can prove is, one, if we can find proof that the Jews actually existed during a certain time prior, let's just say 4th century BCE, that they had a legacy and people talked about them, it gives more validity to the Bible itself. So what you had when you start to look, what did you find? You find a bunch of scholars who were trying to prove the existence of Jews. They were trying to look for the Jews. Now, this is prior to the whole conquering of Kemet. So understand, as I tell the Hebrews, when Kemet fell, part of the Egyptian empire was Israel. It stretched all the way over to Israel. So they came into Israel, they conquered Israel, which was full of African people, Egyptians, black people. I talked about Tunis, I talked about, Tyre or Tyrus. We know it was Africans there. All this was conquered, right? So when they conquered these lands and they started to implement Hellenization, which Hellenization is basically the spreading of this, what we call the Jewish doctrine. So they took these Africans and made them Jews, Hebrews. They bred them they didn't breed them. They basically raised them, put them in school to learn this and say to them, this is who you are. You are these people. And they made priests and taught them to go out and spread the word, just like we see with the Bible Christianity with the slaves. You had that one black guy that was up there preaching to the slaves. It's the same thing back then. It's where the whole concept came from. So when you look, you find these philosophers and researchers, Greeks, trying to prove this existence, right? So this is what you find. There's quite a few expensive books on this whole thing. And it says, Plato, in the creation of the Hebrew Bible, for the first time compares the ancient law collections of the ancient Near East, the Greeks, and the Pentateuch to determine the legal antecedents, which basically means the precursor, for the biblical laws. Following on from his 2006 work, Berosus and Genesis, Benito and Exodus, Merkin takes up his theory that the Pentateuch was written around 270 BCE using Greek sources found at the Library of Alexandria, and applies this to an examination of biblical law codes. A striking number of legal parallels are found between the Pentateuch and Athenian laws, and specifically with those found in Plato's law of circa 350 BCE. Constitutional features in biblical law, Athenian law, and Plato's laws also contain close correspondences. Several genres of biblical law, including the Decalogue, are shown to have striking parallels with Greek legal collections, and the synthesis of narrative and legal context is shown to be compatible with Greek literature. All this evidence points to direct influence from Greek writings, especially Plato's Law, on the biblical legal tradition. Finally, it is argued that the creation of the Hebrew Bible took place according to the program found in Plato's Laws for creating a legally authorized national ethical literature, reinforcing the importance of this specific Greek text to the authors of the Torah and Hebrew Bible in the early Hellenistic era. This study offers a fascinating analysis of the background of the Pentateuch and will be of interest not only to biblical scholars, but also to students of Plato, ancient law, and Hellenistic literary traditions. Now, here's basically the review of what one of these researchers wrote about Reed and American's findings. And this is basically what they said to sum it up. It says, the thesis is therefore clear. The Pentateuch is a Greek work inspired by Greek sources. Understand, the Pentateuch is a Greek work inspired by Greek sources. To just piss some Hebrew off if they're watching it. The book is constructed in 6 chapters each, followed by bibliographs relating to that chapter. An index of sources and an index of authors closes the volume. It says thus, the thesis that the author pursues in this sequel of the first volume is that the Pentateuch in its legal parts is inspired by Platonic sources to which the 70, if you understand the letters of Orestes, the 70 Jews, had access in the great library of Alexandria. The argument is simple and comparative. The greater number of Pentateuchal laws, even if they had some Semitic precursors, seem copied from the Athenian law, or more precisely, the Platonic laws. Beyond this argument, the author proposes that the laws of Plato constitute a new hermeneutical, which basically means interpretation, a new hermeneutical key for the ideology not only of the Pentateuch, but the whole of the Bible. The Bible is the official national literature mandated according to the same instructions of the Platonic laws. You understand that? That is big. So understand, Merkin, he was real careful in his book to not, say it flat out. He said what he said, and he let the information speak for itself. And if you got enough knowledge, you came to the right conclusions. But you had later scholars come out and say, what he meant. They reviewed the book. And the implications are, well, if this is all true, which it looks, then the Greeks created Christianity, which I've been saying. They created Judaism. It's all bullshit. Now, American doesn't really come straight out and say it, try to make it as if, these people actually exist, because I doubt he want to really get in, on the bad side of Jews who running everything. But it's as if these people existed, and then you could somehow say, well, the Greeks didn't want to put out the truth. So they basically distorted. Like, they want to say that the Hebrews existed, but the Greeks didn't want to put out the truth. So they kind of distorted the information from the Hebrews about, what they actually said, which don't make sense, because if you didn't like it, you wouldn't have put out nothing. You wouldn't have said, you wouldn't even did the information, you would have put out your own stuff. So the story of getting these 72 Hebrew elders to put out this information doesn't make sense. Now, in understanding that you're going to do what they did with this whole creation, they could have done that, which it looks like they did. Go get 70 so-called Hebrews and get them to do this so-called translation just to have a record of it. Now, whoever came up with this whole Black Hebrew Israelite doctrine understands all this. They know, which is why, they don't really want to jump on this. They wouldn't dare read any of those books because they understand the implications. Now, the whole thing is they understand that when you go back and do the research, it all points to white Greeks. But when you leave that little door open saying possibly, this is what they're piggybacking on. Now, This is the reason why King James must be black. As I said, because if King James is black, then you can say, well, God gave King James the true translation, the real translation. Don't read what these Greeks talk about. Read the King James version, the real translation. Or they'll say, the Masoretic text, because it's in Hebrew. Stuff like this. But what they don't say and what they don't address is, how come your God gave the knowledge to the white man before his chosen people? Think about that. Clearly, the Greeks had this information first. So why is it that God gave it to them before his chosen people? Why would he give it to them? Who would change his image and change everything about the book and make all these so-called lies and so on and so forth. But you expect us to take the same stuff that was supposedly created, in deception and believe you on it with no proof. So now understand this, and this is what these Hebrews are not getting. If you don't do the research, you're not going to know this. And this is painstaking research. It is so much. You got to be crazy. You got to be obsessed, which, I am. And I really was back then when I was digging into all this. You got to be, because there's so much, you have to dig into. And if you learn it in truth, you'll figure it out. I'll lab on this later. You'll figure it out. So anybody that's doing research on the Jews, the Hebrews, 4th century BCE. If you're looking for anything on the Jews prior to 4th century BCE, there's only 4 sources that you can really go to. 4. And of those 4 sources, only one has real tangible, evidence that you can really believe. And he's the only one that everybody really goes to. So this is how you can break this stuff down. This is how you know who's who and who's doing the research. Because anything anybody said besides these 4 people is pseudo. It's bullshit. It's iffy. So these 4 people are the suspect one. I start with him first. Josephus, right? Josephus. Then you have Aristobulus. Then you have Diodorus Siculus, who this is largely about what Merkabah wrote it. And then you have Hecataeus. Hecataeus and Diodorus is basically the primary people that he's sourcing for this book that Merkabah wrote, because that's who you have to source. If you arguing with somebody about this and they're not citing, which the Hebrews will not, they won't, and you're going to find out why in a second. If they're not citing Hecataeus and Diodorus Siculus, forget it, because it's pseudo. It's pseudo. We're going to get into this in a second, but understand that. So you have Hecataeus, who is a large part of this book. He was 25 years old when Kemet fell. So he had 25 years of seeing Kemet being ruled by Egyptians. 25 years of that. And I believe he died in 550 BC. So he had 25 years, or that's when Kemet fell, was 550. So he knew, he had knowledge. Hecataeus understood what was going on. He's a historian. Look him up. He's a Greek historian. And he has 2 very important works that everybody knows about when you start researching this guy, Hecataeus. So you have Yanela, which Yanela basically means genealogy. Yanela Greek means genealogy, right? So Yanela genealogy, and Storia. So Storia is basically your history. So Storia, Greek history, that's where we get story, Storia. Yanela genealogy. That's his book. That's what it translates into. The most important book is his one that's basically on his journey. The journey that he fucking took, supposedly, around the world, which is pronounced Periostos Gamma Sigma. Periostos Gamma Sigma. I got to say it a couple of times to get it out. But it basically means journey around the world. So you have these important books by Hecataeus. And he's known for these books because he supposedly traveled and did this research on these civilizations of people, which is why he must be cited. Now, there are only about 300 or so fragments of these books in existence. And you have Theodorus, who is known for being, a person that had this library of books, of rare books. And supposedly he had probably a more fulfilled book or manuscript of Hecataeus' words. So it was fragments, but probably more complete than what we have today. Now, understand, Theodorus Siculus was born, about 400 years after Hecataeus. So we're talking about hundreds of years later that he's referencing Hecataeus and his works, Theodorus, right? So that's one of the important things to understand. When people are going to reference, they're going to Theodorus, who is referencing Hecataeus, who is important, because if you're going to say what somebody said, we need to know who this guy is and what he said exactly. And the thing with Theodorus and his writings, because Theodorus is paraphrasing Hecataeus. He's paraphrasing him because he's not going directly from manuscript, copying what he said specifically. He's paraphrasing from the fragments that he had. Now, as scholars, you have the fragments that all scholars agree upon that Theodorus cites. These are the fragments that everybody say, these ones is okay, they're authentic, we believe these are real. And you have the fragments that they don't have that is questionable. And for many reasons, which we'll get into some of them, because they don't know, just like Theodorus, he speculates a little bit, but he's paraphrasing what's said. So now the whole thing is, of course, you have Hecataeus, who was born, around the time the Egyptians was ruling. And here's a guy who lived through the rulership of the Egyptians and lived through the conquest of the Persians. Now, if this dude was an historian and he traveled the world, as it says with his books, he's supposed to have traveled the world and everything like that, and did a genealogy and all this, at some point, he had to speak to Jews. There's no way he could not have spoken to Jews or Hebrews. He had to have, and he had to have mentioned them. Now, according to Theodorus, he never mentions them. He never says that he spoke to any Jews. In fact, he says that what he heard about the Jews came from the Egyptians, which makes it even more suspect that how could you not have spoken to any Jews? And it says here, let's read. The undisputed fragments of Hecataeus in Theodorus Siculus' library, Book 1, display no awareness of the Pentateuch, while the account of the Jews in the Book 40 is so divergent from the Pentateuch as to guarantee that Hecataeus did not have access to Jewish writings, translated or otherwise. These difficulties are usually overcome by postulating that Hecataeus learned about the Pentateuch from Jewish priests living in Alexandria. But a second difficulty is that in Theodorus Siculus' library, Book 1, Hecataeus repeatedly named Egyptian priests as his sources. Nowhere did he claim to have had contact with Jews. If Hecataeus had contact with Jewish priests or had access to Jewish writings, he would have doubtless have said so to enhance the authority of his account. But Hecataeus made no such claims in undisputed fragments. Third, the detailed information Hecataeus allegedly presented about the Jews in Book 40 was not quoted or utilized by any author from 320 BCE to the time of Posidonius and Theodorus Siculus in the 1st century BCE. That Theophrastus read Hecataeus is certain. Yet, the description of Herodox Jews and Theophrastus on piety markedly differed from the detailed knowledge of Orthodox Judaism in the allegedly Hecataean passage in Book 40. Manetho's dependence on Hecataeus of Abdera is certain, yet his knowledge of the Jews was limited to their location in Jerusalem. That's all they know about them, where they came from. They didn't really know much. 2nd century BCE Alexandrian Jewish writers such as Aristobulus and pseudo-Aristeas, which the letters of Aristeas is pseudo, and they had already came to the conclusion that Jews wrote this later on. The extensive research in the classics, including Hecataeus of Abderius, Aegyptica, but failed to discover a single passage in which an early Hellenistic author of Hecataeus' time or earlier quoted Jewish scripture. That so many writers on the Jews who were familiar with Hecataeus knew nothing of the context of Diodorus Siculus' library suggests that the latter passage did not derive from Hecataeus, meaning it's all bullshit. And you have to understand, this is the foundation evidence of proving the validity of the Bible. This is what you have to go to. The whole thing about the letters of Aristeas, all this stuff, it's all suspect, it's all pseudo. The only real tangible proof is what we have from Diodorus on Hecataeus' supposed writing of, what took place. That he doesn't say he met any Jews or anything like that. So I get Hebrew after Hebrew quoting, Josephus, as if Josephus was this major knowledgeable source who had, real good provable information, where he was always quoting from Aristobulus, which Aristobulus' information was pseudo. And it's even saying here in the sightings. It says down here, Josephus, in conducting a similar search on ancient writings for reference to the Jews, had to resort to the Jewish forgery pseudo-Hecataeus. And this is on the page. It says Aristobulus writing circa 150 BCE will likely have cited the source behind Diodorus Siculus' library, which he didn't, if it existed at the time. And Josephus is citing Aristobulus, and basically we know Aristobulus stuff is pseudo-Hecataeus. Because if it's not, then he would have would have stated what Diodorus had, which he does not, or something better, since he lived, before him. But we don't get that. We don't get none of that information. So, bunch of stuff to look at. Now let's continue down here. It says, thus, despite the doubt attached to many quasi-historical details in Aristobulus' works, it still appears likely that he was correct in such basic details as the Septuagint originating under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who I always talk about, and the involvement of 70 scholars associated with the Judean Perusia in executing this project. We may therefore date the Septuagint with reasonably high confidence to the period of 273 to 269 BCE under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who was a white Greek. Since the Septuagint provides the first objective external evidence for the composition of the Pentateuch, the date of the Septuagint translation becomes a terminus ab quem for the books of Moses, which that's Latin. That basically means this is the only time that you could date this, around this time. That's basically what it means. It's the limit, or the only time you could date something. There exists no external evidence that the Pentateuch was written earlier than this time. Boom. Than this time of Ptolemy II Philadelphus. A proposed date of composition for the Pentateuch anytime prior to 269 BCE is permitted by current evidence and must be seriously considered. Significantly, although external evidence for the Pentateuch is lacking prior to the Septuagint translation of 273 to 269 BCE, the Septuagint set off an explosion of derivative Jewish writing in the 3rd century BCE, both in Syria and in Egypt. The following is a list of the earliest known Jewish writings with approximate dates of composition. None of it predates the Septuagint Greek or the 4th century BCE. And as I said, the stuff is legit. We should find stuff. Historians, people around that time should have been talking about, there's no way in the world you can have what happens in the Old Testament, not written about as much, and then have stuff that is like so meaningless, like just talking about the gravestones of the Greeks. So elaborate, same thing with the Egyptians. And if they do all this stuff depicting what happened in these people's life that we can find, No way all of this stuff goes down and then we find nothing on the Hebrews. And again, as I pointed out, Herodotus, Greek historian, says nothing about the Jews. One of the things he cited says, neither Herodotus nor Hecataeus of Abdera claimed to have consulted the Jews. Rather, the Egyptians were regularly cited as authorities throughout Diodorus Book 1, thought to have drawn heavily on Hecataeus of Abdera. Hecataeus of Abdera appears to have drawn exclusively on Egyptian oral sources supplemented by Herodotus. Never talked to any Jews because they didn't exist. It says here, Hieronymus of Cardia, the historian of the Wars of the Diadochi, 323, when Alexander died, to 278 BCE, fought under Antigonus Monothalamus in Palestine in 312 BCE and was assigned to supervise the collection of Alsfat or asphalt from the Dead Sea. He never mentioned the Jews. I'll leave it at that. And it says down here, the earliest Greek writers who mention the Jews thus provide no external evidence of new developments in the evolution of the Torah. At the time of the Elephantine Papyri, 494 to 400 BCE, we have authoritative Jewish priestly regulations, but no evidence that these have been committed to writing. The Elephantine Papyri also testify to toleration of practices contrary to the Pentateuch. As late as 315 BCE, Theophrastus described contemporary sacrificial practices among the Jews that the Hebrew Bible condemns as heterodox. The first mention of Moses as Jewish founder and lawgiver occurred in Hecataeus' A Aegyptica in 320 to 315 BCE. Manetho also mentioned Moses probably not long thereafter. Neither author attributed writings to Moses, although both appear to have viewed him as the lawgiver of the Jews. Other than the disputed fragment of Hecataeus in Diodorus Siculus Library 40.3, the Septuagint translation is the first definite evidence of Jewish writings. So it's clear as day what's going on here. The stuff that they was writing about contradicts the Hebrews, their supposed doctrine. And they're reading this stuff and it's like, no way this could be Hebrews if this stuff is real because they're doing stuff contrary. And then to really dig deeper into this, you got to understand that these are Greeks. Plain and simple. These are people who are, even if they're black, they're people who was basically grew up in Greek understanding of things. This is later after the conquest of Egypt. Egypt is over 100 years gone now and conquered around this time. So we're talking about a couple hundred years later, so they are basically being indoctrinated into this Hellenization and the rituals. So contrary to what was written about, what must have happened is they came up with the story. They came up with who these Jews are supposed to be. And they got priests, they got people to go out and spread this story. So it reached the ears of historians and people who was documenting the times. So all these historians you have, when you start to look and research this, they're gathering around and trying to figure out, okay, we know these people are Jews. These people are supposed to be these people, but they're saying this is what happened to them. This is who they are, and so on and so forth. Let's validate this. And then they're going out. Now, we don't even know, one, Hecataeus, and what he actually said. We don't even know because everything seems to be in, fragments. We can't get no real information because it's in fragments. But they have the fragments to say, oh, this person existed because we have fragments. But there's still no way to know if he existed or if he actually wrote this stuff. Diodorus he's paraphrasing. He's going off of what he thinks. Remember, this dude was born 400 years later. He don't know if Hecataeus is real, but he got his hands on this information that could have been easily planned for him to find and write about later, or anybody to find and write about. The point is, there's no real proof of these Jews. There's absolutely none. And just like we can go and find the tombs of all these other people, there should be mass tombs of these Jews. But the Hebrews believe, oh, God took them away. Oh, why don't God take y'all dead people away? Why did God leave them in the ground? But he takes our dead people away. Okay, where's the civilizations? Where's the artifacts? Where's the writings? Where's any of it? There's no proof. And then, again, why would your God give your doctrine to the white man before you if you are his chosen people. So again, it's not hard to see what's going on here. And that's enough information right there to really close the book on this whole thing and get you into the understanding of whoever smelt the Delta. It's just that simple. They gave it to us. It's written in their language. What more do you need to say? It's case closed on this whole thing. And there's so much more. This is just a small piece of proof that the Greeks gave us this thing. And it gets a lot deeper when you start to understand history and conquest and what happened and the decisions the Romans had to make as far as picking up the, because you got to understand, as I said in many videos, you got to look at the fact that you have the Roman Empire who had their own, mythologies and their own Caesars and so on and so forth. They had their own culture that they completely scrapped and picked up where the Greeks left off once, they came together. And they just scrapped their whole entire culture and everything they believed and everything they talked about and picked up with the New Testament and picked up where the Greeks left off from the Old Testament, gave us the New Testament and just, Pope, Catholicism, Christianity, so on and so forth right after that. So you need to understand what this whole thing is about because it's much deeper than just, the Greeks and what's going on. It's a lot more to this. So there is no reason to go and look anywhere else. And if you don't actually research, this is what you'll run into. This is what you'll find. It was the Greeks. The Greeks started this whole thing. And it's a lot more that you're going to see once you continue with the Roman aspect of it as it relates to Islam. So it's a lot to it. But thank you guys for taking the time to watch. Again, make sure you guys, take advantage of the sale. It's up now. Take advantage. See you next video.